Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard. Learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude. Welcome. This week, I am speaking with Jillian Benfield. She was a TV journalist, worked as a news anchor and reporter in Columbia, South Carolina, and Augusta, Georgia. Jillian loves to cook. She's the youngest of 4 children, and she's been writing on the internet since 2014, more consistently since 2019, and then she signed a book deal in 2021. She is the author of The Gift of the Unexpected. Jillian is a Partners in Policymaking graduate and says that if you're a parent of a child with disabilities, she highly recommends it. I can't wait to tell you more of her story. Welcome, Jillian. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation. I really love the ways that you have been vulnerable in your story and that you have really listened for God. I think it's so important that we allow him to interrupt us and that we allow him to show us the value of the story he's writing in our lives.
Well, thank you for that. That was a learned skill that does not come naturally to me. But now it's kind of become a way of living since having gone through the unexpected.
Absolutely. I think it's a learned skill for all of us. I mean, none of us really want to do things that feel uncomfortable or things that we don't know what the next step is. And we have to encompass faith and we have to encompass trust and we have to really believe in something, someone other than ourselves. And that's hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah. So one of the things I like to do a little differently on this podcast is to start at the beginning. As a journalist, as a writer, as an author, I think you understand it's really important to have the backstory. And so I think God writes the best stories that there are. And I love to help people see the thread of him working in every story that I share. So would you be willing to tell us a little about your childhood?
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Things that are important that for this conversation, I would say is I was always a singer. And when I was 8 years old, I would go around and drop to one knee and belt out the final notes of the Little Mermaid song. And people around town knew that about me. I was a born performer. And Also important for this conversation is probably to know that my faith background was quite confusing. I was raised by former Catholics, and they did not want to baptize me in the Catholic religion because they were going to have to take courses on how to do that. And I was the youngest of 4, and they're like, we have done these courses. We're not doing them again. And so they went and found what they called the religion with the least amount of rules. But we were just kind of infrequent churchgoers, really. But they were unhappy with the public school system in our small town. And so they sent me to a private school. And that private school was quite fundamentalist. And I don't blame my parents for this. I think they probably thought all Protestant, schools, religions kind of thing would be the same.
Yeah.
But what it was this very fear-based, very hell-based environment. It was not a great introduction to the God of grace. And all that kind of came to a head when I was 11 years old. I was at church camp actually with a different church in town, same denomination that was probably more intense than the school that I was going to. And I came back from that church camp and just knew that religion was no longer going to be a part of my life. And I was 11 years old at that point. Fast forward to adulthood, I kind of put that performing thing and combined it with what I was best in school, which was writing. And I became a TV journalist. And I met my husband at the beginning of college. We started dating towards the middle of college and got married right when we graduated. And he went to dental school in Augusta, Georgia, and I was a news anchor and reporter in that area. And I always admired his religious upbringing, and I would say that I believed that there was a God by the point that we got married. And we started going to church, and I saw this bullet in the bulletin about a 9-month-long intensive Bible study, and it would cover 80% of the Bible. And I looked at him and said, we have to go. And I knew that if this God was ever going to be a part of my life outside of Sunday morning, for me, as the journalist that I was, I had to kind of investigate Christianity as a journalist. And so that's what I did. I went to this class, and 9 months later, was very, I felt like it was the first time I was really introduced to Jesus was during this class. Like, all of the religious upbringing that I had, or at least the points that I can remember, was so little about Jesus and so much about this God of wrath. And so that's when I would say that I really came to faith. I was probably around 23, 24 years old. And yes, I think that gives us a good foundation, possibly.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I wrote here in my notes that you said religion a lot. You hadn't met Jesus. You hadn't had a relationship, and I don't think you knew it existed. I know I didn't when I was young. You just encountered a lot of people and their rules. And a lot of those rules, they just don't bring life.
Yeah.
Why would you want to follow that? I also wanted to bring up something we talked about in your pre-recording call. You shared with me that when you met your husband, you were dating someone long distance. Your husband approached you, though, with a pivotal statement. Do you remember what that was? Because I think it's so important. It shows his character.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely shows this character. He said to me one day after we had spent some time together in a group of friends, at the end of the day, we were by ourselves, and he said, your boyfriend will marry you, and I can't guarantee you that, but I can make you happier than he can.
Wow.
Everyone kind of has the same reaction when I say that story. It shows his confidence. There is no one more confident than my husband. And, I don't know, he strikes that balance of being confident, but not conceited. And I don't know how he does it, but that's who he is. And 2 days later, I broke up with that boyfriend. So
yeah. Well, and obviously it worked. And I would say the way he gets the balance is Jesus. He has a confidence, but it's balanced with a humility. And that's awesome. What a great partner to have.
He is an amazing partner. He's who I dedicated my book, The Gift of the Unexpected, to, because I think my acknowledgement says something like, to Andy, thank you for loving me, who I was before the unexpected, who I was during, and who I am now becoming. And he has really loved me well through all of the phases.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. Now, eventually, he took an Air Force dentistry scholarship that moved your family to New Mexico. What was that change like for you?
Yeah, so we originally were in Las Vegas, Nevada. And then, I was hoping we were going to get this location that would allow me to go back to TV news after taking 11 months off. And then we got this news that we were moving to the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. And I was devastated. I was devastated because, quite honestly, we had filled that dream sheet with locations that were very dreamy, And that would have looked very good on my social media platforms, and that people would have envied, like European destinations and that kind of thing. And we filled it with practical locations that had news stations where I could get a job. And we got neither of those. And so all of a sudden, I had another podcaster say to me that she thought this was one of the most vulnerable lines in the book. But I told my mother-in-law at this point, when we got the New Mexico assignment, I said, I think what hurts the most is that nobody will want my life anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was true. It was true. I think that I was building a life that I wanted other people to want. And I thought that was, the success. I thought that's where success lied. And yeah, so it was kind of an identity crisis to get that New Mexico assignment. And then the unexpected was packed on top of the New Mexico assignment, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. I mean, what's standing out to me is you said you cared about what looked good, and what God was trying to get you to believe was, did you believe that whatever he gives you is good, right? And he moved you somewhere to maybe have you take a look at how you were living and how you were thinking. And then you said, no one's going to want my life. And I hear God strategically moving you so you realized how much he wanted your life. I mean, that's powerful. That's powerful.
Yeah. There were so many lessons wrapped up in that New Mexico assignment for sure.
Yeah. So you did end up getting pregnant. Would you tell us about the life-altering results?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the same day that we found out we were getting New Mexico, that we got New Mexico, and I was crying and all these things, I got this weird feeling to take a pregnancy test. Our daughter had just turned a year old. We were not trying at all, but this weird feeling wouldn't go away. And I ended up finding an old test in a drawer that somehow made the cross country move with us. And it was positive. And I was in shock, and I thought, okay, God, you want me to be a stay-at-home mom. This is part of your plan. Okay. I even snapped a picture of that positive test next to a map of New Mexico, and I laid this graphic over it that said God's perfect plan. And I printed it out, and that's how I told my husband. And, at that time of my life, I feel like I just had to wrap everything up so neatly. I think I'm a Enneagram 3 for your listeners who are in that. And I just reviewed the Enneagram 3 chapter in Ian Cron's book, The Road Back to You. And it said that 3s have to, if they do fail, they have to wrap up their failures and make it look like a success. And that's what I was doing. I mean, of course it wasn't a failure, but it felt like that to me, who was undeveloped at that time, undeveloped spiritually and maturity wise and that kind of thing. And so anyways, it's interesting looking back on that. But it turned out that, I don't know if this was God's perfect plan, what ended up happening, but man, it's a more heartbreaking and a better story than I could have written on my own, for sure.
Yeah. Aren't they always? There's something about looking back, which is why I like to start in the beginning and really seeing where God was moving and how he meets us in the places where we didn't receive what he had for us. Instead, we received foundations that were lies, that were not his truth, and things about our heart that he wants to change so that you can be the best you that you could possibly be, and so that you can love others for him with his fullness. And so he cares so much about us that he'll do anything, and he'll meet us anywhere to show us how much he loves us. Now, I think it's interesting that you wrote God's perfect plan, because, you were doing so because you were trying to wrap something up and make it perfect. And yet it's so ironic that God's plan is always perfect. Now, perhaps he doesn't pick and choose all of the parameters, but he is in every single thing, and he makes goodness out of every single moment, even the difficult ones, even the traumatic ones, even the ones that you don't want to think about and you don't want to remember. He is there. And so we're never alone. And that's just such a beautiful thing about God. Now, you had told me that when you knew that you were pregnant, you took the test, you went to a doctor and they did some blood work.
Mhm.
What was the result of that?
Yeah, so they found some markers on the ultrasound that indicated that our child had a higher chance of having a trisomy. And we were totally caught off guard. Both of us had just turned 27 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And even the doctor himself was caught off guard. He was like, yeah, this, he like went through all the markers and he's like, this still only gives you a 3% chance of having a child with a 3% higher chance of having a child with a trisomy.
Mm-hmm.
But we went through this 2-week waiting period, waiting for the results. And finally, I get a phone call from my husband, and he said, the doctor called. It's not good. I'm coming home.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember my heavy 21-week pregnant body just falling on the kitchen floor. And I just said, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, this doesn't feel real. This doesn't feel real. And finally, Andy walked in and I could tell he was going to be sick. I followed him to the bathroom. And after he did get sick, he laid his head on my chest. And I just remember his hot tears rolling down my shirt. And, we were, like I said, we had just turned 27 and we were in shock that this was happening. And we had to go to the doctor's office to get the official results. And we
Mm-hmm.
walked in and he said, well, it's not good news. Your child has a 99.9% chance of having Down syndrome. And it's normally at times like these, people want to talk about their options.
Wow.
And I said, okay, what options? And he said, option 1 is you terminate the pregnancy. Option 2 is you continue your pregnancy with a high risk doctor. Okay, can you just tell us about Down syndrome? And he seemed surprised by my question. And he said, well, at worst, he'll never be able to feed himself. And at best, he'll mop the floors of a fast food restaurant one day. But don't worry, don't worry. You don't have to be a hero. You can have the baby here and we can keep him comfortable, but we don't have to do anything drastic to save his life.
Oh my goodness. And let's just put a pin right there.
Yeah.
First of all, that's the worst bedside manner I have ever heard in my life. Second of all, like, how did that make you feel that someone was telling you not to necessarily have your child, or if you did, to do things in that different way than what you were expecting as a mom who's already had a child? So that's what happens, right? We have one and then we expect the second one to be just like the first one. And it's this like very subtle lie that gets in there and really disrupts us. So how did you feel? What was going on?
Honestly, it was definitely one of those out of body situations. It was so traumatic, his speech, that I actually blacked it out for several days or maybe more than a week. And it wasn't until my mom repeated back to me what he had said a week or so later that I was like, oh my gosh, like
Mm,
it all came flooding back. That's how traumatic it was.
mm-hmm,
And I have a line in the book about how, somehow like these dark moments just stick out in my mind. Like I can remember all of these details about the dark moments, but the best moments kind of run together in a brightly colored blur, and
mm-hmm,
but this would be the exception to that. I think his speech did make me, I really cannot remember what that night was like. I said in the book that I only remember that night was as dark as my memory.
mm,
Basically he was telling me that our child would have a life that was not worth living. That was
yeah.
that was the indication, right? To let him die of natural causes
Mm,
meant that he would have a life that was not worth living. And so I grieved as if a death had taken place.
yeah.
And it took me weeks and months to realize that, yes, the doctor's speech did spur on that grief, but I would not have grieved as hard or as long if my views about what constituted a worthy life were similar to the doctor's.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What was it like having conversations with your husband? Like, how did you two work through that time?
That was a real test of our marriage in a way. Not because we didn't get along during this time by any means. We just handled it so differently from each
Hmm.
other.
Hmm.
And we really had to meet each other halfway. I'm an external processor, I guess you could say. So I wanted to talk about it all the time, and he wanted to talk about it not at all.
Hmm.
I was really going through the motions of, I guess, grief to acceptance during the pregnancy, but he really couldn't even get himself there until our child Anderson was born.
Wow.
That was, I mean, he cried before Anderson was born, but I felt like the moment Anderson was born, and after everybody cleared the room, I told him that, I feel like you need to lay your head on my chest and cry. And he did. And I
Hmm.
felt like that was the big release moment for him versus my big release moment for me. My, what I call my breaking open moment in the book, um, was when we got the official results. So after this doctor's speech, we went and had an amniocentesis done. And that's when I accepted that he did have this
Hmm.
chromosomal difference.
Hmm.
And that's, I compared it to what I would assume, like, yeah, in biblical times, putting the sackcloth on and that sort of thing. That was my moment like that. And it
Yeah.
was an ugly, ugly cry. And it was necessary. I think breaking open is necessary to, breaking apart can help you break open. And that was my moment for me. His happened later. And, it was really a good thing for our marriage because we had to take care of each other differently than how each of us needed to be taken care of individually.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you talked about that breaking open point, I wrote in the side of my notes here, seeds can't grow without breaking open. Like God was growing something important, and you have to have that breaking open and that kind of dark moment where you really don't know what's going on, before suddenly the new thing begins to grow. Now, you had told me during our pre-recording call that you had this beautiful memory when you realized that you were having a perspective change. You said it was when Anderson was 10 weeks old. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So when Anderson was born, and I write about this, I had this overwhelming peace the day he was born. And I felt like he stared into me, like my eyes so deeply and just broke through. And it was the first time where I just felt like he is who he's meant to be and things were going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at the same time, soon after that, he was rushed to the NICU for breathing issues. And it turns out that he had not one, but two holes in his heart.
Mm-hmm.
And we were waiting to see if they would close on their own, which they did not. But because he had the two holes in his heart, feeding him alone was a full-time job. It took him 45 minutes a day to eat 8 bottles a day.
Wow.
And that didn't include, I was pumping at the time and I had a toddler, I had a 21-month-old.
Mm-hmm.
And life was very heavy and very dark. And all of a sudden I became a medical mom. It was nothing for us to be at the doctor or a therapy appointment 5 days a week. And
Yeah.
my life turned upside down. And we weren't in New Mexico anymore. We were in Arizona. The military had to move us, so we knew nobody. We were on an island together, and that was it. But so I was really in this dark spot, and then at 10 weeks, Anderson smiled his first real smile, and um, I don't know, just something in me softened all over again, and like his birthday, it was like seeing him all over again for the first time.
Mm.
And just something in me, it's not like it was a total 180, but it was
Yeah.
the beginning of a shift.
Yeah.
And it was, a beautiful day I won't forget.
Yeah, as soon as you said he smiled his first smile, I was over here smiling. That's a beautiful thing. I remember as a mom, when your child smiles for the first time, it's just there's something awakens in you that this bond, I think, goes to a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what was happening was the natural was taking over of being a mom, was taking over all of these other things that were going on that were so hard.
Yeah.
And that sounds so hard. I mean, you were alone. You didn't know anyone. You were going through so many emotions just to even keep him fed. I
Mm-hmm.
can't even imagine how difficult that must have been. And then being at the doctors all the time and having to deal with things that were unknown and scary. Yet that smile that's so beautiful broke through. Isn't it amazing that God gave us smiles?
Yeah.
I mean, you ever think about that?
Yeah.
What a beautiful thing, because it doesn't matter what language, doesn't matter if you can speak at all. Everyone understands a smile. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. That's beautiful. Now, when Anderson was about 2.5, you had your next child. Can you tell us about that pregnancy and that child?
Yeah. So a lot happened. Anderson ended up having open heart surgery. And then we, kind of got into the groove of being parents of a kid with a disability. And we decided that we wanted to try again. We wanted to have another sibling close in age to Anderson and hopefully, have him in high school with somebody at all times. So that was kind of our thought process. And
Mm-hmm.
um, we got pregnant and that ended in miscarriage, which was very, hard. Felt like, gosh, we've already been through all this hard. Why couldn't this be easy? And then we got pregnant again. And we announced that pregnancy at 13 weeks. And at 14 weeks, I went into the doctor's office and they couldn't find a heartbeat through the little Doppler thing. So then I went into the ultrasound room and it was very clear something was very wrong, even to my untrained eye. His stomach was like almost twice the size of his head. Um, and what ended up happening was he was diagnosed with posterior urethral valves,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very serious and sometimes deadly diagnosis. It's basically a blockage in the urethra, and then babies in utero can't pee, and pee is what makes their lungs develop.
Mm-hmm.
Breathe in that amniotic fluid, and then that's how our lungs grow. And so, anyways, at 18 weeks, we realized that his bladder had burst,
Oh
and as
no.
terrible as that sounds, it was actually a good thing
Mm-hmm.
because it meant that that pressure, that fluid, had been released and his lungs could develop. And so it was a very hard, very trying, very touch and go situation. We ended up moving again with the military to Texas
Mm-hmm.
during that pregnancy because that's just what we did. As like a baby would come and we would move. And I had to move to the Ronald McDonald House in Houston away from my family because this child would require fetal intervention surgery. And so that's what I did. And so, right, on the heels of going through the hardest time in our lives, which was
Mm-hmm.
Anderson's pregnancy and all that came with that, plus the open heart surgery, and then going into this pregnancy, it was excruciatingly hard. And those feelings of abandonment and,
Mm.
why God this, we're very strong all over again.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss as well with the miscarriage in between all of that. I'm sure that there were just so many levels of grief that I'm hearing here, so many
Mm-hmm.
levels all
Yeah.
happening at one time. And having to go to the Ronald McDonald House by yourself must have been really difficult because you already didn't have a village. You just moved, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So now you didn't even have your partner. So
Mm-hmm.
what was that time like? Do you think you were just not making your way through? Do you remember anything specific about how you felt then?
I remember their Mercy Me had a song that was very popular at the time. It's called Even If. Are you familiar with that song?
I am. Yeah.
That was the only thing I could hold on to
Mm.
was the sentiment in that song
Yeah.
because nothing made sense. And if I tried to think about it too much and why God would allow this to happen to us again,
Hmm.
um, it, I didn't get anywhere with it. I couldn't. There was nothing made sense, and um, but I knew that at the end of the day, I believed what I believed. At least the big things were still the big things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's what I held on to was I still have this God who I believe sees me and my suffering, knows the depth of suffering,
Hmm.
and somehow is here.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what I mean, that's not a great answer, but I just remember clinging to that.
No, it is. I mean, literally, you're talking about El Roi, the God who sees me, and clinging on to that is so important because your response could have been, I was angry. I was bitter. I was
Mm-hmm.
depressed. But that's not what you said. You said, I held on to who I knew God was, even
Yeah.
though I didn't understand. So that's really powerful. Um, Now, since you had no village at that time, once you were back with Andy, did you have a village then, or was it really just kind of the two of you?
It was just the two of us again.
Wow.
And actually, what ended up happening was we had moved to Texas for him to do an orthodontic residency. And the directors of the residency asked him how my pregnancy was going. And he told them the truth. And they came to him that day and said, we really want you to delay this residency. And it was a really hard decision for him
Hmm.
because he had already taken the long road. His other friends who were orthodontists and do the military and they graduated dental school and they went to orthodontic residency. And so for my husband, who's a very ambitious person, this was a really hard call for him. But
Hmm.
he ended up doing it. And thank God he did, because at this time, after Preston, our youngest, was born, he tells me, I think there's no way this can be true, but he tells me that we had 18 specialists between the two boys.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a very hard, we're just surviving year, the first year of Preston's life. And Anderson had a lot of medical stuff going on at the time as well. So,
Yeah.
it was just us again. And it was hard, and community is so important. But I will say this, like how you mentioned earlier, we have a God that, might not be in every single detail of the plan, but how he makes things come together in a good way. And where I see God at work in both of these time frames where there was no village, where there was no community. And I think this is something that your listeners, probably a lot of them, can relate to at some point in your life. There looks like, where's the village?
Hmm.
Um, he grew our marriage just exponentially. Um,
Hmm.
and that's one of the greatest gifts to come out of that time.
Yeah, this might sound like a strange thing to bring up, but when Elijah had just prayed to shut up all of the rain from the sky, God told him to go, to turn, and to hide. And he put him by the Kerith ravine. Now, it says brook in some of the different translations. So I always saw like this bubbling brook, right? But it
Mm.
wasn't. It was ravine that had been filled with water. Now there was going to be no more rain. So it was kind of like a clock. And he sent him to this place where he spent time with him. He fed him he had crows come in and feed him, ravens. He gave him that water and he spent time with him, but he was hidden away. It was an on purpose thing. He told him to go there, right? And in that time, as he strengthened, then he sent him out to do a completely new ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I'm hearing. He put you guys, said, go, turn, hide. Here, I'm going to take care of you. He strengthened you. He strengthened your marriage. And then when you left, when that time was done, when the ravine was empty, you left.
Mhm.
And he took you into a whole new ministry, because actually that's what happened. You started blogging, you started writing, so I guess it's not strange that God just dropped that in my spirit, but it's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
No,
Beautiful.
I love that. And I think, I had already been blogging and that sort of thing, but it was just such a strange thing. After Preston was born, that's when when I had all of this going on and all of these medical appointments,
Mm-hmm.
that's when I got this like desire. It was like this inner thing that was like, now's the time to press the gas pedal.
Yeah.
Now's the time to push forward. And you know
Mm-hmm.
what? Like, my life was wild and chaotic at the time, but it was a very like inward time. There was a lot of inner work happening
Mm-hmm.
during it. And that's when I started. It was a couple months after that. I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book. And that's what happened. And when we left Texas is when I got the deal to write the book. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would say that's a really good metaphor.
Yeah, yeah. And it's pretty amazing how God uses the things that we don't necessarily like so much while we're going through them to do the work that has to be done for us to do the work that we love, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's with us in our calling, and he's given us our desires and our talents and all of the things that we need. But he wants every person's calling and ministry to be unique. And he has very particular people that we're all going to reach. You're going to reach different people than I'm going to reach. And that's the way that it works. He's so inclusive. And I love that he cares that we are ready to do the work.
Mm. So true. Gosh, I mean, it's a little off topic, but I've seen something happen in my life where somebody tried to do the work before they were ready.
Mm,
And you can see the consequences of that.
hmm.
And
Yep.
it's a ministry type work. And it's like, no, you gotta go all the way through the process.
Hmm.
Because you're going to learn so much about God and yourself, that's going to make that ministry, um, be
Hmm.
what it should.
Absolutely. And it's God's ministry, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's allowing us to join him in it, which is amazing. But he needs you to be in the right place, right mindset, right heart, for
Mm-hmm.
you to be able to carry what he's giving you to do. And it really does make a difference.
Yeah.
Having had those situations myself, it when I read that the first time and it really struck me, I went, "Oh, that's what you were doing." Okay,
Mm-hmm.
thank you. Thank you for the hard time that I felt so alone. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you spent about a year writing the book. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what was inspiring you to write the story? Why do you think you suddenly hit the gas pedal? How did that happen?
I had this feeling to hit the gas pedal, at least with blogging. And then it turned into, we did slowly gather a community around us. And probably when Preston was like 9 months old, we started hosting a Bible study at our house. And we were, we're all parents, all little kids. And so we would just do these video studies,
Hmm.
basically. And we listened to this very old Andy Stanley sermon.
Hmm.
I mean, if you go back and watch the whole series, I mean, it's so 90s, like the skits and everything. Do you remember those?
I, I do. I'm over here laughing. I do.
Yes. Okay. So it's Andy Stanley's The Will of God series. You can find it on YouTube. So just fast forward through the skits. But the last one in that series it was very practical. It was like, he had this puzzle box, and what do you want this picture to look like 5 and 10 years from now? And I just knew 5 and 10 years from that point that I wanted to write books and speak sometimes.
Hmm.
And that's, because I still knew that my husband's job would be, the primary job. And so
Hmm.
that was the balance that I could see for myself. And so I did. I just started writing the book. And I think that I had the book in my head for a very long time.
Hmm.
But of course, it changes as you start writing it. And just piece by piece. Yeah, it took a year to do. And then I kind of did it a little bit backwards. I was told if you write a memoir, you have to write the memoir first and then get the agent, which is what I did. And then I was told that was wrong. That's what I did. And it all ended up working out. But even that had struggles, for somebody out there who might be a writer or somebody who's trying to obtain kind of a lofty goal, one of those, like, there's not like a set track that you follow type goal.
Right.
The first round, the first version of that book was rejected by the 10 major Christian publishers. And that was another round of heartache. But I knew that it wasn't over because of everything that I had gone through and how God had seen me through all of these different unexpected circumstances. I still knew that the story was going to be told. And I just had to put my marketing hat on and figure out to how to mesh it with what the publishers were saying. And, I did. And I think it was 5 months later, there was 2 book deals on the table. And so, so the unexpected once again.
Yeah. And I love how the talents and the things that you're passionate about, the things that you went to school for and learned how to do, the singer in you, the storyteller in you, like all of those things, right? That part of your heart, God allowed you to use. And I think you had the tenacity because you had the vision, because you had those giftings, right?
Yeah.
Someone else might have given up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that for me, maybe I would have given up had I not gone through these other things because, as a 3, as I mentioned earlier, very averse to failure, right? And even as a young person, I did these things that really looked brave on the outside, right? I sang a national anthem for opening up for the Orlando Magic game in front of thousands of people. Like, that looks brave. And it was, in a way. But I only invested in myself in a very, very narrow way, in ways that I knew that I couldn't fail. This going through the unexpected and getting knocked down time and time again made me realize that I was braver than I knew, more resilient than I realized, and that with God, that this was going to come to pass, because I just felt very, very strongly that it was what I was supposed to do. And like you said, actually, I think what really inspired me to write the book, like you were talking about my giftings and my past and the storytelling, the singing, like all of it coming together. And what really inspired me originally to start writing that book was my life always meant to end up this way? That was the question. Was Anderson always meant to have Down syndrome? And was I always meant to be a mother of a child with Down syndrome? That's what originally inspired the book, because I was so fascinated how God was using all of these pieces. And I think the book definitely, it took a different direction, but I think because of seeing those pieces and seeing how God was working them together, it kept me on the track to go forward.
Absolutely. And you had the talent and the knowledge to be able to write in such a way to meet the publisher's needs with the story that you had to share, that other people might not have been able to figure out quite how to do. That's difficult when you have a story, you've already written it, and then somebody's coming in and saying, and all of publishing is like that. You end up with a team, and it ends up being a lot better. It ends up being different than what you originally saw, but you're really the one in charge of how the story unfolds. And so I think it's a beautiful part of it. This kind of, there's a community built in, and I don't think we always know that ahead of time before we get started.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you did get an agent, you went through all of these changes, you got 2 book deals. So once the book was published, what was your book launch experience like? Because a lot of people, I heard you talking about, needing to kind of take a hold of the marketing. A lot of people don't understand all that goes into putting a book out there.
Yeah. Thankfully, I had several first-time author friends in my corner. who had published books just before I did. So I knew a little bit of what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have this team around you, but at the end of the day, it is mostly on you.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the marketing, the publicity is different. Thank you, Rebecca, for getting in all these podcasts. But at the end of the day, they are relying on you and your platform, your built-in
Mm-hmm.
audience. And so I knew that going in, and it's been a great experience. Everybody told me to that a post book launch low would come.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it didn't. And I think it didn't because I know through all of the things that I've been through,
Mm-hmm.
um, I knew that this moment would be a great moment, but that the real joy and the real I don't know how else to say this. I guess just the real joy of it was the process, and
Mm-hmm.
it was.
Yeah.
It was what made it so. I didn't expect this moment, this book launch, to complete me, but I feel very, very satisfied with the feeling of having been through the muck and
Yeah.
kept going to get to this point. And I think that's why I haven't experienced that low.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting and awesome. What a blessing because a lot of people do go through that, and it is nice that you had some seasoned friends who'd already been through the process. It's very
Yeah.
helpful. Now, I don't always ask everyone this, but I did want to ask you because I think when we talked during our pre-recording call, we talked a little about your heart, and you have this heart for other people that are going through what you're going through, whether it be exactly the same thing or not, the emotions and the change and the process, trusting that process and trusting God and finding your faith. And so what I would ask you is if you could do anything new for God,
Mhm.
what would that be?
Yeah. What I would really like to do, but it just feels really, really big right now. And maybe it's something that will come later, or maybe I will feel a nudge to get a move on it sooner than I realize. But if I could do anything, I would create an organization that would be full of inclusion specialists.
Mhm.
So like summer's here, and I can sign up my two typically developing kids for anything, right? It's very easy to find camps and
Mhm.
little classes and things like that.
Yeah.
It is not easy for my child with Down syndrome. And I guess what I would envision is that there would be these like inclusion specialists that we would train, and they would accompany your child to cooking class. Like that's what I really would like Anderson to go to, as a cooking class, because that's what he loves.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and versus I don't want to take him because that's his mom hovering over him,
Right, right.
and so if I could do anything, it would be something like that, a vision that would have these people, maybe they'd be volunteered, maybe they'd be paid, I don't know, but they would make the world a more inclusive place,
Yeah.
and get our kids with disabilities and adults with disabilities more involved, and live in a world where everyone belongs, which is what I think is the vision God has for the world.
Absolutely. First of all, I love that idea. And I can hear the passion. And I want to just remind you, if it feels big, if it feels big, that's because God has to help you do it.
Yeah.
And the second thing would be, if it feels big, ask God. He owns all the cattle and all the hills. He can do
Yeah.
anything. So, if you've been talking to him about it, I don't know, maybe I could just nudge you to talk to him about it a little more, because I would love to see that kind of world. I
Yeah.
would.
Right.
That is the way that God wants it to be, and it's the way it should be. But we
Yeah.
need hearts who have been transformed to do those things.
Yeah. I know. I think it will probably come. This is my husband and I have gone back and forth on, what different nonprofits that we envision, but this is the one that really I just feel like the world needs.
Mm-hmm.
And, weirdly enough, is a friend who we were in Augusta with, who connected us with another Down syndrome family, just found out they're going to have a child with Down syndrome. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe, maybe there will be a
Yeah.
team of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
to be determined. We'll see how God works. So.
Well, now that you're part of my podcast family, I'll definitely keep that part in prayer for you because that's exciting.
Yeah,
And
we'll
yeah.
see.
And then I just have one more question to ask you. I always end with this question. I just love it because it's so open-ended and you can answer in so many ways. It's my favorite question. If you could give your younger self any advice, what would that be?
I would tell my younger self that life is bigger than you imagine it to be.
Mm,
And that the vision you have of your life right now is not the only life that's possible. And to be open to opportunities when they come your way,
mhm.
open to opportunities that, might feel too big,
Yeah.
might feel too risky, you might not feel equipped for, because you will be amazed by how God works through things like that and will work in you through things like that.
Very wise advice. I would take that advice. Um, Thank you. And everybody, I just want to remind you to take a look in the show notes because we will have links to be able to buy this wonderful book we've been talking about, as well as to follow along and see all the great things that are coming. And I guarantee you, sometime in the future, we're going to see that we're going to see that nonprofit. There's just something about it that the world really needs that. But I ask that you would follow Jillian, take a look at her book, share it with others. A lot of us know people who are going through some of these things if we are not ourselves. And so it'd be a wonderful gift as well. And I just want to thank you, Jillian, for your time. Thank you for your heart and vulnerability. And thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that your listeners will open up the book and figure out what the gift of the unexpected can be for them.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. You know, if you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.